Hi everybody. I'm gonna make a video. I had a viewer ask me about my what my methods are for learning a language. I may have touched on it before. I can't really remember, but it'd be a good topic to discuss. I think methods. So, how do I go about learning a foreign language? Well, I've done it a few times now. I'm no expert, but and everyone has their method, everyone has their way, and a lot of people try to claim that theirs is the best on YouTube and wherever. Everyone thinks that theirs is the best because for them, it is the best because it works for them, but it may not work for somebody else. Anyway, so I've noticed that people on YouTube are either really extreme, so either really input based, so listening, reading, or output based, just go out and talk and speak and write. Um, I think that it's everything. Everything's all related. I think it is. I certainly think that input is extremely important, especially in the early stages, because that's how you learn a language. You need to get used to the sounds, learn the vocabulary, hear the structures over and over. I think that's important, very important. But I don't think it's the only thing that we should focus on. And other people say you should just go out and use the language, which might be difficult for some people because they don't have the language yet. So I like to combine the two. Typically, I'll get myself a learner book. A Teach Yourself usually is the one I usually get. It seems to work quite well for this sort of technique. I get a Teach Yourself, and I'll listen to the chapters. I go through each chapter. Um, if it's a serious language, I'll go through every single chapter. If it's a language I'm not that dedicated to, then I won't necessarily. I might go a little bit more randomly. Um, but it depends. You can skip certain chapters that you don't think are important to you, and you can always come back to them. Better off starting off with something that's relevant to you. So I'd use the Teach Yourself. I'd listen to it, get used to the sounds, listen to it maybe once or twice without trying to remember anything or understand anything. Just go through the dialogues and listen to them. Get used to the sounds. If it's a language that you're not familiar with, then start going through it seriously. So work through each chapter, write down vocab which you've heard in the dialogue, and you've got the translation in the book as well. So write that down. I keep a journal. So any language that I've learned, I've tried to keep a journal. So with Indonesian, I've done a lot of that. I've done a lot of writing and using Teach Yourself at the same time. And the more Teach Yourself I use, the more I can write. So that's how I remember vocab. I'll write vocab that I like or that I think is important from each dialogue. Won't be everything. I'll write it down in my journal and then keep listening to the dialogues until I can understand the dialogues, and I try to pick those words out, those particular words out that I've found, because you can't pick everything. So if I choose 3 or 4 words or 10 words and try to notice them in the dialogue and keep listening until it sounds like a natural dialogue, I can understand what's going on, at least most of it. So I've got that written down, and then I write. So I try to incorporate those words. At first you can't do it because you don't have the vocab, but slowly, the vocab that you've picked up from the Teach Yourself, you can use in your journals bit by bit. You'll be limited at first. So that's what I do. I keep a journal and try to use the vocab that I've learned from each chapter. And then I just keep writing and reusing that vocab. So I think it's sort of a combination between input and output, because I learn the vocab, but I write it and I use it all the time, instead of just listening to it and recognizing it. But that's not enough, because it may be harder to remember. When you may recognize it, but it's hard to remember when you're trying to use it when you're speaking, and it will take longer. So I tend to do that. I tend to write a lot because usually I may not have native speakers around me to practice on. So that's a good way of getting the input and the output, because the writing is the output, and that helps your vocab go from passive to active. So that's what I tend to do. Keeping a journal is good if you don't have people to talk to. If you have a lot of people to talk to, native speakers, then Get as much exposure as you can from them, and even if you want to use what you've learned, go and use those words. That's what I do. I don't have a special method. And I think that this works. This works as in it gets you up to a reasonable level pretty quickly. So within 6 months, you can write reasonably well. You can, yeah, 6 months to a year, let's say. You'll still be very limited in terms of other work because there's always a lot of vocab to learn. So when I get to that level, and I've used the Teach Yourself, and I can write confidently. I keep a journal. I write every day. What happens in my day, I write it. Sometimes I make it up. Sometimes it's true. It's just the purpose is of practicing that vocab that I've learned and putting it into a meaningful context. So I like meaningful context. So if something happened today and I want to write about it, the weather was this, I went here, I saw this person, blah, 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 whatever. That's real because in my mind it's reality. It's not something that it's just from a textbook. It's happened to me. So I find it easy to use that vocabulary. So make no mistake, you will be limited still, but I think it's a good way to get to that sort of intermediate stage, and then you can just keep doing your passive listening and learning vocab and doing the output and practicing with native speakers, of course, as well. So that's what I do to keep the vocab that tends to come in. I use straight away when I write. So I guess keeping a journal that helps me. Other people don't do it. I'm sure most people don't keep a journal, but I like doing it. It just comes down to what you like to do. I think it's a good way to keep track of the vocab that you've learned from the learner materials. It's a good way to keep track of the vocab and use it, even though you might still be limited to some extent. Well, no, you will be limited. You'll still be limited, but this will give you a strong sort of output, bit of input and strong output. So with that, those few hundred words that you have, you'll have them at your disposal. You won't have to think too much because you'll know them very well. Some people think it's better to go for thousands of words, and they're not active, they're passive. And that's true, that's good too, because when you're learning a language, you want to have good comprehension. You don't want to not understand what's happening. But it's a long road either way. You may have great passive ability and your output abilities aren't very good yet, but they will improve because you have the passive knowledge. You just need to put yourself in a context where that language is spoken and speak and speak and speak and speak as much as you possibly can. Either way, it's a long road, and if you apply my method, then you'll be speaking quicker. I'm not saying I speak from day one or I go and speak in the first week of learning language. I don't, but after the first 6 months, or 3, let's say 6 months, I really want to get that. I really want to start using that language, whether I'm limited or not. So it's up to you at the end of the day. Thanks.